So, hello everybody, it's Siobhan again from At One Wellbeing. So what we're going to cover today is talking about the self-critic and the inner critic and the things that we can do for ourselves, and even recognizing the impact that the self-critic and inner critic has on our good mental health and how we feel about ourselves. And I know from my own personal perspective, sometimes that inner critic can run rampant in my head. And what I have identified myself is that the powerfulness lies within me to actually recognize it, to give it a personality of its own, to know where it came from, and an actual fact to do things for myself that can help to address that inner critic and change that internal conversation that we're having with ourselves. And I know it's really, really difficult sometimes to do that, but I think that by understanding the inner critic, where it comes from and what we can do, gives us a sense of control over it and things that we can do positively to help make ourselves feel better and to manage our own good mental health. So as normal, I'm going to share the presentation with you. So one moment, please, and share and make it bigger. So silencing that inner critic. So the inner critic exists, I would say, in every single one of us. And as I said, it's about recognizing and addressing the inner critic, because it does sometimes take over and it has the power to make us feel really, really bad. So the presentation today, we're going to look at what the inner critic is, where it comes from, the types of things that it can say to you, how it affects you, and what you can do about it. Because I believe that, once we start to proactively look at our own mental health, look at our own well-being, and identify the factors that are impacting upon us negatively, that gives us a whole sense of well-being. It gives us a sense of control, a sense of managing our own mental health, which is a very, very important aspect of mental health and well-being. So the inner critic, I don't think that I'm going to have to explain or describe this to you, because we all know what it is. It's that voice that judges and criticizes. And you know what? The criticism genuinely and generally is not objectively justified. So judgment, criticism, it takes us down. It says nasty and mean things to us. It's an inner voice. It demeans us, it judges us harshly. And sometimes, most often than not, that criticism is not justified in any objective manner at all. And a highly active inner critic can take a toll on your emotional health and well-being, and it can affect your self-esteem. Because if there's an inner voice telling you all the mean and nasty things about yourself, which in actual fact are not true, well, that affects your self-esteem, it affects your self-confidence, it affects your emotional well-being. And you know what? This is a subject that's very, very close to my heart, because I have managed my own inner critic for years. And sometimes it's so powerful that it can take over, and it can, make me feel really bad about myself. So I think today that if we can have a conversation about it, although this is not technically a conversation, is it? Because you're not here. But you know what? Just by helping you to understand it better, it gives you much more control over it. So where does this inner critic come from? Where does this voice within our heads that tells us that we're not good enough and that judges us harshly, where does it come from? Well, it's generally from early life experiences. They're internalized by things that people say to us, behaviors that are around us, attitudes that have people towards us, and it's taken in a way that we begin to think that it's true about ourselves. Some of these, and very often many of these negative voices, come from our parents or primary carers, school teachers, people that we see as important in our lives as we're growing up, and we pick up on these negative attitudes. We pick up on negative attitudes not only towards us and negative things that's said to us and negative behaviors towards us, but we also pick up on negativity that people feel about themselves. Because as children, we do know that we're all sponges at that very formative stage in our lives, and we take these things on board ourselves, and these negative voices can very often come from childhood experiences, but can come from interaction with peers and siblings and influential adults, people that are important to us. So when I was young, I took on board a lot of the things that people said to me, and they became my reality. And then they became a voice in my head that says, oh, you can't do, oh, you shouldn't even try, oh, what are you doing that for? Sure, you're rubbish at that. So do you know what, when you reflect back, and I don't want you to go back and live in the past because it's gone, but just sometimes the influence that the things that people do or say or how they behave or their attitudes towards us, just recognize that sometimes that we're taking them forward into our adulthood, and that forms itself in our own heads as an inner critic, and that self-critical way that we talk to ourselves. So understanding where it comes from, and I'm sure you probably already knew where it comes from, but I just thought it was important to touch on that today, because once we begin to recognize and understand, like when we were children, things were said to us and we're taking them on board, we took them on board and continue to take them on board, and the impact that that has on our confidence, on our self-esteem, on how we speak to ourselves, and how damaging that can be. And I suppose the inner critic for me is important, because if we can do something about it today, like today is the start of understanding, today is the start of challenging, today is the start of silencing that inner critic, because it's doing us no good at all. And sometimes the inner critic can, pretend to protect us from our emotions and feelings, but generally the inner critic is doing damage to our emotional health and well-being. All right, so types of things that the inner critic can say to you, and you may have a longer list than this, but I'm just giving you some examples of how that voice within your own head can speak to you. And it can be subconscious, and that's when the subconscious aspect, when you bring that out into the open and you begin to understand it, it does give you control over it. So you're useless, you're not good enough, oh, you're dull and boring, I can't be bothered spending time with you, I can't, I'm awful, I'll be awful, I'm awful, I'm a nightmare to be around, I'm just fat and lazy, why can't I be like A, B, C, or D? Nobody likes me, I'll never have somebody to love me, it's not fair, I'll not get the job, I'm a mess. So when you think about saying those things to yourself, you're useless. If I turned around to you one day, if you were a friend of mine, and I turned around and says, here, you're pretty useless at that, and you're really, really not good enough, and you're awful, you're a nightmare. If somebody else was saying these things to you, what way would you react? And yet we give our inner voice and inner critic complete control over the things that they say to us, without thinking about challenging, without recognizing that, what, is this justified? I reckon it's not justified, because if I said to my best friend, you're useless and you're not good enough, she would soon say to me, away out of my road. I am not listening to that for one moment, and I would imagine the friendship would end. So the types of things that your inner critic says to you, think about the damage that it's doing to your self-esteem, the damage that it's doing to how you feel about yourself, and even, when your self-esteem is low, when your confidence is low, how you then project yourself outwardly can be impacted. Although that voice can still go on in your head, and you can appear really confident, with high self-esteem, but this thing is going on and on and on and on, telling you how useless you are, how rubbish you are, you shouldn't even try, you shouldn't even start. And you know what? If you continue to give it permission to do so, it will not stop. It will not stop. So I take it upon myself every day to talk kindly to myself, because the effect that inner critic can have on you can be really, really difficult. Because it can cause shame. It can make you feel guilty. And most of the time there's nothing to feel guilty about or nothing to feel ashamed of. It is self-defeating. It stops you from even taking that step forward. It brings you down every single time. It undermines your self-confidence and self-esteem. Can you think of times when you're talking to yourself negatively and how that makes you feel? How it affects you in terms of your feelings of self-confidence and self-esteem? It undermines your accomplishments. So when you're thinking negatively, when you're speaking negatively and nastily to yourself, what does that do for your accomplishments in life? And we all have accomplishments in life, but the self-critic can really undermine that. It attacks your self-worth. Imagine attacking your self-worth, and yet this is a voice in your head which has come from experiences that you have had in the past, and it's still living and breathing in your head. And you know what? It just attacks your self-worth. That feeling that you have about, how important you are, how you're loved, how you're valued, it just attacks it. It can make you judge yourself really, really harshly. And you know what? When the inner critic does its merry dance in my head, well, then I start to judge myself against the things that it's saying to me, until I really begin to say, no, it's not happening. It tells you stories that are always negative. right? So it's going on and on and on, and it's bringing you down to a level where it's really, really difficult sometimes to even function, and it's having such an impact in your life that at some stage we do think that, you know what, this is my reality. This is just how it is, and I am not a good person. And it makes you question yourself, and it makes you feel inadequate. And you know, when you look at all of those things, and there are more, I mean, I couldn't go into huge amounts of detail on how it affects you, but these are the things that I recognize myself. These are the things that my inner critic and my inner voice can say to me that makes me feel really bad about myself. Do you recognize any of these? And you know what? There may be other things that you recognize within yourself, but it does affect us, and that inner voice that tells us the negativity, the negative stories all the time, makes us undermine ourselves, it makes us judgmental about ourselves, it is self-defeating, it attacks our self-worth. And then you think to yourself, oh my goodness me, it's there. I recognize it, I can identify it, but what is it that we can do about it? So this is a beautiful exercise, right? What I would encourage you to do is just to go through this with me right now. We know what it is, we know the way it can affect us, we know the things that it can say to us, we know how it makes us feel, we know how it impacts upon our emotional well-being, our mental health and well-being. We know that it exists, and then what can we do? Because once you begin to do something, I've always said, do nothing equals do nothing. So if we can no longer tolerate what we're saying to ourselves in this inner voice that's telling us all of these negative things, if we can no longer tolerate it, today is the day to do something about it, right? So number one, recognize it, because it happens day in and day out. Recognize it. Recognize that that's an inner voice telling you a story about your life, which is not subjective. It is not based on reality. It is not based on fact. And then when you start to recognize it, then externalize it. Bring it out into the open. Draw a picture, right? And I do this all the time when I'm doing this presentation. I take a big flip chart screen and I start to draw a picture of my own inner critic, right? So what does it look like? What sort of personality does it have? What is it saying to you? What tone of voice does it have? What name have you given it? Right, so that's externalizing it. So it's taking it out of your head and putting it onto a piece of paper, and it's like, right, okay, so I'm starting to recognize and realize that this is my inner critic. I draw a picture of it, right? So mine's generally is like really, really, really thin. It's like an awful face. It's got like horns, and it's, oh my goodness me, it's just a slippy creature. That's what it looks like. Personality, it's a bully. The inner critic tends to be a bully. It's telling me all the bad things, all the reasons I shouldn't even try, all of the things that I feel very, very deeply personal. What's it saying to you? You're not good enough. You're so lazy. What would you even try to do that for? You're this, you're that, you're the other. And the tone of voice that mine has for me, and yours will be different, of course. The tone of voice that mine have is like nearly like a whisper. And it's slippy and it's sneaky and it's always underhand and it's always there in the background. And I would say the tone of voice that my inner critic has is slippy, sneaky, slipping about in the background, because my internal value system is about frankness, about openness, about transparency, about honesty. So naturally enough, my inner critic is going to speak to me in a voice that I despise. I despise people who do not value honesty, frankness, openness, transparency. So the tone of voice actually then takes on the exact opposite to what I value in my life. What name have I given it? Well, I haven't given mine a name that I would say out loud, but I have given it a name, and I'll tell you sometime when we see each other. So is it angry? Is it hurtful? Is it undermining? My inner critic is really hurtful and is really undermining. Like even, for example, when I'm sitting here in front of this screen doing these videos, my inner critic's going like, oh my God, what are you doing this for? Sure, look at the cut of you. Look at that hair. Look at that top you're wearing. Sure, you look awful. And that's hurtful and that's undermining. And you know what? If I allowed it to take control, I wouldn't be sitting here today doing a video or a webinar for yourselves. I would be sitting in the living room on the settee doing nothing. But I refuse to let it undermine me or even hurt me. What are you saying back to it? Right? What are you saying back to your inner critic, to that voice that's saying, oh, don't even do this, Siobhan. Why would you do that? You're a fool. What am I saying back to it? Well, if your self-confidence and self-esteem is at a low level, you may well be agreeing with it, right? But then you ask yourself, can you make a really conscious choice about whether to obey, argue, ignore, or laugh at it? Because if you obey it, well, then you're within its control. If you argue against it, then you're into a negative dialogue. If you ignore it, does it go away? Well, yes, you can ignore it for a while, but generally it'll come back and back and back. Or you can laugh at it, because laughter is such a powerful tool in dismissing that voice that tells you that you're not good enough, or you can't do, or you will fail, or you will never be able to get a job, or you will never be able to lose weight, whatever it is. And are you telling it to stop, right? Do you tell it to stop? Do you say, here, hold on a wee second, I recognize you, and you're not getting away with it today, as you would expect somebody else to say to you if you were saying things to them like the things that you say to yourself? And so what is its response to you standing up to it, right? Does it like it? Does it shrink away for a while and then come back? And what will you say the next time that it appears? Because what I find is when you're trying to change something that impacts upon your mental health and well-being, you know, changing it once is great, because then you have the tools and techniques at your hand to allow you to do that and to enable you to do that. But what I always think, it takes practice, practice, practice. It takes consistency. It takes you to really think to yourself, you know what, this is it. Today is the day, and I will continue every single day to challenge this inner critic. So what will you say to it or do the next time that it appears? And the time after that, and the time after that, and the time after that, because practice, 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 consistently challenge the inner critic. Because you know what? You are too good to let your inner critic take you down, to let your inner critic make you feel judged or shamed or guilty or fearful of the future. You know, all of these things to erode your self-esteem, to erode your self-confidence. No. When you find your voice, when you find your inner voice, the positive inner voice, and the confidence to stand up to this, what I would call the bully in my head, when you find the confidence in the words and the techniques to actually stand up to it, that's a very powerful tool for you to have in your mental health and well-being toolkit. And I say the inner critic is there. It is a bully. But you know what? When you remember, even, I'm not sure if any of you remember, like the bullying types at school, you know, the minute somebody stood up to them, they kind of disappeared. But sometimes they come back, and then you stand up again and they disappear. And then eventually it gets to a stage where you are in control. You have made a choice. You have chosen not to allow the inner critic to run rampant in your head. You have chosen not to allow something that's going on in your head to hurt you, to undermine you, to be dismissive of you, to make you feel bad, to make you feel low, to make you feel down, to make you feel depressed and anxious. You know what? When you realize that you have control over this thing, it gives you, I say, the confidence to actually do something about it. So the inner critic's there. I know I say sometimes it sits in my shoulder, it's not even in my head, and it's like right up to my ear, and it's going yip, 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 yip. And some days I'm like, oh my goodness me, not again. I thought you were gone, and now you're back again. And sometimes it depends on what's going on in my life as well, that it is a stronger voice sometimes than others. Other times I can ignore it. I never obey it. I generally don't argue with it. I just say stop, right? So what can you do about it? The beauty of it is you can do something about it, and you can do something starting right now to do something about it. So, top tip. When I think about my own inner critic and the journey that I have come upon myself to get to the stage of, I suppose, would you say, confidence that I have today. And people would say to me, Siobhan, oh my goodness me, how confident are you? Well, do you know what? Sometimes when people say, oh my God, you're so confident, I nearly go like, oh, really, me? In actual fact, yes, I have confidence, because I have challenged the inner critic day in and day out for years. So I confront it directly by being fairly, I've said really assertive, but I be fairly assertive, like, okay, right, okay, I've had enough of you now, stop, shut up, shut it. And I know that sounds a bit rude, and I don't like even saying that into the screen today, but you know what, sometimes you just have to be as blunt as like, shut it, I've had enough of you. Today is not the day. You're not helpful. You're not constructive. So you have got to go. You cost me too much emotionally, and I am silencing you. These are very, very strong words. I'm shutting you out and thinking calmly and rationally. So go away now. Stop this nonsense. Stop this nonsense. So when you start to have that like internal dialogue, and it's a really assertive way for you to take back control, right? It's a really assertive way for you to say, stop right now. Today is not the day. I refuse to listen to you. You're telling me lies. You're not being constructive. You're not being helpful. You're doing nothing for me, only making me feel miserable. Confront it directly. You know, these things actually work because when we start to change that dialogue and that internal conversation, and we do it consistently over time, you will find that in actual fact, you take the wind out of the sails of that inner critic. And that thing that sits on my shoulder is like, right, you're gone. You're gone. And then when it comes back the next time, because it will come back, because even the most confident people, excuse me, have an inner critic. They have that voice that's saying, oh, you know, you're woeful, you're awful, you're whatever. But these people who have better confidence and more self-esteem tend to have more techniques and tips to actually silence this thing. So that's what I want you to develop, is your own way of managing your inner critic and understanding the impact that it can have on your mental health and well-being, and understanding how bad and low it can make you feel. And you know what? There's something really strong in the language that you use and the assertiveness that you build up over time, which says, stop this nonsense. Today is not the day. I refuse to listen to you. And I am going to replace you with a much more positive voice, right? So a much more positive voice saying, you're not good enough. Well, of course I am. I can do anything that I turn my hand to. Oh my God, you're so lazy. No, I'm not. I happen just to be tired today, and I deserve rest. You will never achieve anything, really. I have achieved so much in my life to date, and I will continue to achieve the goals that I have set myself. You will never amount to anything, really. Well, I'm here now, and I think I'm important. I think I am loved. I know I am loved. And you know what? I feel my own inner strength, and you do not have the power to do anything about it. So replacing the negative commentary within your own head with much more positivity. And again, it takes practice to be positive. You know, I do look in the mirror sometimes and go, oh my God almighty, look at the cut of you. Yada, 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 Siobhan, leave yourself alone. Because you know what? There's nobody else looking at me, even thinking those things, never mind saying them to me. Because if I met some friend out in the street and she says, oh my God, look at the cut of that hair of yours today. Oh, crikey's almighty, that makeup's rare. Oh my God, look at how many wrinkles you've got since I last saw you. I would soon give them the short shift because I wouldn't tolerate it from anybody else. And now I have learned not to tolerate it for myself. I won't tolerate that inner voice taking me down. I deserve better. You deserve better. And you know what? We all deserve to live a fulfilled and happy life. And if you allow your inner critic to continue to bring you down to a low level, well, do you know what? Today, stop. Just stop today. And arm yourself and equip yourself with all of the techniques that you can use around developing positive thinking. And we have talked about challenging negative automatic thinking styles, building your self-esteem and building your self-confidence. These things all fit together very, very closely in terms of how you maintain good and positive mental health. So how you can help yourself, let's do it. Just draw it out there. And once you have used the items in the previous slide and you draw this thing and then you sit and you look at it and you go, seriously? That's you? That thing there has the power to take me down, to make me feel bad, to make me feel low, even to make me feel depressed and anxious. And you look at it and you say, oh my goodness me, no, no. Why do you have such power over me? Because I give you the power. Do you know what? Today I'm taking the power back. And what I'm going to do is rip up that piece of paper, rip up that inner critic, crumple it up, put it in the bin, and I am taking back control. Take back control, and you can do it. You can do it because we all have internal resilience that once we bring it to the surface. And once we begin to realize how strong we really are, and those strengths that sometimes we don't even recognize within ourselves, that really is about taking back control. And you can do this. You can do this because I know I have done it myself. And most of the, in fact, all of the exercises that I'm doing as part of this series for Cookstown and Western Shores Area Network are all about experiences that I've had and how I myself have actually overcome this stuff. Doesn't mean that I'm a perfect individual. It doesn't mean I'm wonderfully happy all the time. I don't put that pressure on myself to be happy all the time. I accept the days where I'm like feeling a wee bit like, oh, I can't be bothered today. That's okay. That is okay. But there are some things that once we put it into practice about how we motivate ourselves, how we build our self-confidence, how we build our self-esteem and recognize the things that are impacting it, recognizing the people that are impacting it, then we can actually build up to a level where if we're having like a day where we just can't be bothered doing anything, that's okay. I can accept that because I know in my inner compass that I am okay. I am okay. I feel well. I function well. I'm happy 95% of the time. I don't put pressure on myself to be happy all of the time or to have this wonderful outgoing life all of the time. No, because that's unrealistic for me. I have got to understand that some days will not be as good as other days. But the one thing I don't allow is that inner critic to take over and, you know, become nearly that voice in my head that is so powerful that I can do nothing about it. Well, the good news is it's there. You can recognize it. You can draw it out. You can use whatever tips or whatever techniques that you want or whatever words that you want to describe it. But the fact of the matter is today you can take back control. And I love that idea of taking back control because sometimes we just accept the things that are going on without challenging them. You can do this. You can take back that control over that thing because the impact that it has on us can sometimes be relatively, listen to me, can be devastating to our feelings about ourselves and our self-worth. It's not worth it. So listen, I will stop sharing and we will conclude. I have an exercise about the inner critic that I can send out to people, and it really is literally just all of the things that are on the slide, and it's just inviting you to think through about this inner critic and what it does to you and what it says to you and what it looks like and what tone of voice it uses, because you will have a very, very individual inner critic, as I do. All I did today was describe what mine looks like and what it sounds like and why it sounds like that, because it challenges my internal value system. Because if it didn't if it spoke to me in the same way as I speak to myself positively, well then it would have no control over me. And if it was of the same nature as I have and the same values as I have, well then I wouldn't see it as an inner critic. I would just see it as an extension of my personality. So the inner critic can have a poor impact on our good mental health. So what I wanted to do today was just to introduce the subject, just to give you some ideas on what you can do about it, what things it can say to you, how you can challenge those things, how you can be more assertive around it, how you can take back control. So listen, all I have to say now is I wish you were here. We could have a really, really good conversation about this. We could all be sitting with a pen and a piece of paper, drawing our own inner critic and bringing it out of here onto a piece of paper, and that's all it is. It's just a manifestation of that out on a piece of paper, and just to remove it from, you know, taking up so much space in your head and so much space in your mind, and to take the power out of it and for you to take control back over it. So listen, that's me done. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope, like everything I do, I hope one person gets one thing out of it. Well listen, have a great day, and I will see you again soon. All right, bye.